Well, welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
I'm glad you're here.
Me too. This is like the first time we've had a podcast and started talking like 10 minutes before we recorded.
Yep.
We've already had a whole podcast.
It's true.
But I'm going to cut it out of here. It's a secret podcast for our secret listeners.
It was called Friendship.
Yeah.
Well, if you're here and listening, you probably saw the title. It's going to be something around how to pick influences in your life or who to choose to listen to. One of the things that Ryan and I have recently bumped up against is we recognize that the modern world has some incredible gifts to offer, and one of them being just information is so easy to get a hold of, and influences and people that you can listen to and resources that you can take advantage of. And that is an amazing thing. I don't want to undermine that in any way, or nor say information is power in a lot of ways. Like if you the correct information.
Misinformation is also power.
Yes. So, having access to, information is really important. And so one of the things that I feel like, maybe it's something that just we bump up against when we recognize that there's certain times that confrontation or struggle or hardship or even divisive things pop up. We want to know how to sift through and figure out what are the voices that we should lean into and what are the voices that we're okay to tune out.
Yeah. How do we navigate this massive, overwhelming sea of information? And one way we could choose to navigate it is just follow a leader.
Yep.
Follow somebody who is simplifying the chaotic mess of information, saying, actually, it's more clear-cut than you think, and it's this one thing. Or trust me, and I'll help you navigate through whatever. And so, honestly, that's a lot of the more politically stanced news stations, like not local news stations, although they have a bias towards selling products and then doing real journalism, but then selling random products and like brain fuel, alpha brain or whatever. But then like they have a stance, which is we'd like to make money and then report on local news.
Yep.
And more national news stations have a different stance. It's like we're going to be generally a little more tied to one side or the other. And so you're choosing. If you're saying I'm going to trust them rather than think for myself, then you're saying they have to be right or whatever they say is right, rather than sifting through a group of leaders, a group of voices to listen to.
And I think that's kind of maybe one of the, and I have a few things that I think I want to point out as kind of possible pitfalls. And then I want to kind of talk through and maybe try to grab a couple of helpful tools as well. One of the things that I've found to be one of the easiest ways to get off base or to become inclined is to have a previously decided truth or a previous decided agenda, and then to go looking for resources that confirm your agenda. And what I mean by that is like if it feels really good to have a perceived smart person or website or whatever confirm what you thought was true.
Yeah.
And that is a dangerous pitfall in the sense that can be addicting to have people over and over again confirm what you already. So I guess my thought process is if you're not reading or listening to things that are making you not angry because they're just untrue, but are said in a way or talked about in a way that make you pause and ponder and reevaluate and make you go, okay, maybe I need to listen. So that makes it's not dangerous to listen broadly, if that makes sense. I think there's a natural proclivity of like, don't put those crazy thoughts in your head. And to a place, like a boundary is fine of like, don't read things that you feel like are harmful, but also don't put up walls around possible perspectives and understandings about a God that's beyond understanding, that's mysterious. And so to put something as like you have it all figured out and you're just looking for the same things to be repeated so that you feel good about it.
Yeah.
Be careful.
I think to summarize what we're trying to say is curiosity is killed by tribalism.
Yeah.
If you want to engage in an idea that goes against the group of people you're in, and your first thought isn't, is it true? But your first thought is, would this hurt my belonging in this group? Or would these people be upset that I'm even engaging in this thing? Then that is a sign that you are being shut off from parts of of the understanding of the world God created, even in its brokenness,
Yep.
or ways of thought that you can measure on your own
Yep.
and see, or measure with the help of people that you trust that seem like they're doing a good job. Like,
Oh yeah.
like limiting yourself to these are the acceptable voices to listen to on a subject because my tribe would like them, rather than these are the acceptable voices because I think they're right.
Yeah.
That makes a huge difference.
And a lot of times it really does come down to like I don't want to have to rock the boat or think about something that possibly could make me or others uncomfortable. And I hate to say, but like learning new things, especially the older you get, at least I've found, it can be rather painful because sometimes you've based major decisions on it, or you've modeled it for other people. So then you feel like you're a liar. It can feel like a little bit of a grieving process.
It was about 5 years ago, that I was counseling a parent, as somebody without kids. And I was like early 20s. So who let me do that? But then I was counseling a parent who had a pretty rebellious daughter in their eyes and wanted to live with their boyfriend or sleep with their boyfriend or whatever. And they had kicked her out like multiple times and were like trying to navigate how to do this. And I was like trying to give some compassionate advice and stuff that I'd heard from other parents and counselors and research and data and whatever. And I don't remember what the advice was or exactly the situation, but I'd talked about some of this stuff, and this mom was overcome with guilt and was like, how can I live with myself having parented this other way for this long? It was like an old, like 17-year-old daughter, like almost out of the house. And they were like, I'm afraid she won't come back. And whatever I said, I don't remember. So I'm not giving advice right now. But she was overcome with guilt. And I said, you can't blame yourself for not using tools that you didn't have.
Yep.
How those two can't even coexist. How can you blame yourself for not doing things that you didn't know to do?
Yep. And
you did your
truthful.
best, and your motivations were the best. I want the best life for this for this child of mine.
And I think that's ultimately what this ends up feeling like when it's done the right way. Is it feels like you're going around looking for tools to add to your tool belt. You're not going around confirming that the tool you have is the best tool, and that's the only tool. You're looking for what is the ways that God is stretching my understanding of himself, stretching my understanding of love, stretching my understanding of how to love myself, my wife, my kids, others better. And you're reaching out with that in mind, not with condemnation, not with wanting to be confirmed that you're justified in a certain action or what you're doing. It's always trying to say, God, I'm open to what you want to teach me. I'm open to what my heart needs to learn and grow. I'm surrendered to that your spirit is still teaching me all truth, not just confirming the small truths I already have.
And so we've been talking about it. We've almost been sort of dancing around it, but here's an example. Again, I should have thought about this before. I can't remember the names of any of the people involved, but there was a preacher talking badly about critiquing another preacher and what they had said and whatever. And I was super surprised because it was whoever they were talking about was a really easy person to hate, demonized by a lot of groups that we would feel accepted in. And they were talking about them and were like, they are dangerously, damagingly wrong in this. But they said something after it that was like, we should all believe in. And that feels weird nowadays to be like to think about, I don't know, politics are a really easy way to be divided. To think about political parties saying to each other in Congress or whatever, you're dangerously wrong on this, but we can all agree behind this and get behind this other thing. That feels alien. That feels like giving the enemy any ground is dangerous, even if it's ground that would benefit all of us. And also, they're not necessarily your enemy. Hopefully this is a sort of a pipe dream, but hopefully everybody in Congress is there and elected because they want to support the good of the state that they're from, the district that they're from, and the nation that their state and district are in.
Yep.
That's the dream. I'm not making any promises about politics. I'm just saying that should have been the point.
Well, we're used to this.
And how far away are we?
We're used to this, though.
Yeah.
We're used to this. It's not even an American thing or a state thing or a district thing or a political thing. It's a person thing.
Yeah.
Like it's a thing. Like
It's
when I think about like David, man after God's own heart, you're like, oh my goodness, yes, like kills Goliath, like is a songwriter, a deep relationship with God, restores Israel, does all this cool thing. Also, basically stole someone's girl and murdered her husband.
Yeah. Man after God's own heart. Songwriter, sex murderer. You're like, wait.
So like we know that like nobody's going like, you know, no one's excusing that or making, you know, or saying like that's something you should imitate because he's a man after God's own heart.
Saying that's okay.
That's okay. Like no. So in so many ways we recognize that there's a human element to this, that when you're listening and listening to someone else, and one of the recent tragedies for me was like Ravi Zacharias that I grew up listening to for a decade. That was like someone of a pillar of information, and I felt like was extremely helpful to my journey. And then the controversy after he died that things revealed are just horrific in the ways that he abused and took advantage of his position.
Which if you if you haven't heard about that, we don't necessarily want to bring it back up and make a big deal out of it, but like we did an episode before me did an episode on it, and we'll make that the linked one after this.
And you can go and listen to it. And it's more of just the example of like, if you put your faith in a person to be perfect, be careful. And I say this from stage, even at our church, like give me permission to learn and I'll give you permission to learn. I'm most of the time teaching myself these things. I'm not the perfect operator of these things that I'm even teaching. I'm trying to learn along with you. And you know, if you walked in my shoes for a day, you would probably recognize I need to preach better. Like, you know, like I need to learn more. And I think that's the idea is they don't want to elevate any person to the place of like going, this is the perfect example. Even Paul, like you can tell in Philippians 4 that I used this Sunday, he talks about like, if you see anything in me, if you've seen anything that I do that is like an example of what this is, then do that. Yeah, do it. But he didn't say do everything like me. He didn't say I'm it. He's like, I'm chasing after Jesus. If my shadow looks like Jesus, do Jesus things. Like, yeah, sure. But, you know, in my mind, I think that's more of what I do. So here's what I want to do. I'm trying to change the conversation because we had a recent thing that happened at a local church that in Springfield with a pretty polarizing figure in the Christian world, Mark Driscoll.
Yeah.
And it was at a church in Springfield, and it's kind of going viral right now. You know, kind of how the world does. Like one little clip, and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook just go.
And what's funny is it's going viral in a tribalistic way. Mm-hmm. Hey, here's this thing that is so inflammatory, and it doesn't agree with my tribe.
Yep.
This would not fit within us. And so you can see because of that, I bring that up to say that the way people frame what was controversial about it is different.
Yep.
Some people are pro Mark calling out a thing that happened at this church and it was wrong for them to kick him off stage and whatever. Mm-hmm. Some people are anti-Mark and he should have been kicked off stage because of those comments or because of these other comments or because of whatever.
Yep.
And it's like the way people are coming at this with limited information is showing their tribal identity and tribal lines.
Oh, yeah. And that's what's so frustrating, too, is like an issue like this, which this is not a podcast to bash anything. This is more trying to be a place of wisdom and a path towards avoiding the pitfalls of sometimes thinking that the way you come at something controversial like this is that there is a complete right and wrong, and it's black and white, and like you're either on the good side or the bad side.
I would say I think there is a complete right and a complete wrong, and a semi-right and a semi-wrong and a weird. Mm-hmm. But also, like the way people think about it is there is a right side.
Yes,
and there's a wrong side.
Exactly. And so the idea behind this podcast is more of like, how can we sift through some of this stuff? Because even this situation, which if you want to go look it up, you can, but just know it's no different than almost any other situation that's occurred in the last 2 years where something's said, something happens, and then it's resolved to a point, but you're not there in the room. You weren't there and heard everything. You get little clips, little pieces of it. You have an interpretation of how it went, and then people that were around it or there have their perspective, and it's hard. It's hard to know exactly what happened.
This is probably stepping way far over the line, but it's like all of the random American citizens taking stances on Russia, Ukraine, taking stances on Israel, Palestine, Gaza, whatever. And it's like, it's good that you would care about it. But over here, it just feels like, did you take the stance that makes your tribe the happiest?
Yeah.
And did you dismiss the evidence of the truth and the goodness of the other side because it would make your tribe look stupid because you're on the other side of that evidence and whatever.
And I think that's the struggle of walking through some of this. So I guess here's as myself, when these things go viral, I want to give you kind of a, maybe this is terrifying. I want to bring you inside my head as I'm like watching this stuff come out on Monday morning. And yesterday, this is a Tuesday, it happened on a Saturday. I had to have like 10, 12 conversations with people because they're processing this too. And, I want to let you know that Ryan and I even processed this multiple times because we recognize this is a close thing. These are things in people's hearts. We want to help them navigate it.
Yeah.
And so taking and removing this situation, I just want to let you know, as a general, this is what I naturally do. I gather as much information as I possibly can about the entirety of what occurred. And then I don't have an immediate judgment. Most of the time, I sit with it. And I don't sit with it as like sit with it and wait for me to get angry or sit with it and wait to just get numb to it. I sit with it. And then I go to a trusted person that I know has my heart and mind or knows me.
Yeah.
And then I process it with that person or with those people. And then I think about it again. And then I think about what I would do if I was in that situation or if I was in that possible place. And then I try to think about how Jesus would have handled that, what Jesus would have said in those things. And I know that's so cliche, but there are so many times that I think about certain things and then I put Jesus into the situation and it becomes so much more clear. Let me give you an example of this.
Yeah.
When I'm watching communion be taken at our church, which we take every single week, and we have it at stations, and we invite anybody who believes in Jesus and calls Lord to come and take it and then take it back to their seat. I have 2 little boys that have been sitting with their Nona and Papa that have not been baptized and have not decided, and they are taking communion every week. Now, as a pastor's kid and as a kid that grew up in the church, that feels almost like terrifying, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't be doing that. What if other people look at you and they see you doing that and you haven't like my mind just races to like, am I doing something wrong as a parent? Should I not be telling them to do that? Like where and
will
like
God strike them dead because of 1 Corinthians 11?
Doing something like wrong and I sat with that for a couple weeks, and it's hard because I watch how special it is to my parents that they get to take communion with their little grandsons, and they're doing it with a heart of belonging, but not yet with belief. And Jesus didn't call the disciples to believe first. He called them to belong first. Come and walk with me. Follow me first. And when I sat with that and I thought, would Jesus tell these boys to go and sit back down and not? No.
Yeah.
He would invite them to the table, even if they hadn't come to full belief yet. He wants them to feel like they belong at the table, and they're doing with a heart of wanting to be there, but just not cognitively heart ready yet, but going through the motions in the most pure way.
If you think about the meal at which Jesus instituted communion, it was a Passover meal, and he did it with his disciples, but most families in that country, in that place, would do it with their families. With whatever kids. They didn't hire a babysitter for Passover meal. So they have 2-year-olds who don't get it. They're just following along, and they're doing what 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds do. They're repeating. They're looking out for social cues and breaking a bunch of them, but looking out for them and slowly learning by experience and whatever. They're not kicked out because they haven't whatever. They're actually, that's why I love that we're getting into a big baptism, communion, circumcision conversation here. That's why a lot of older denominations will baptize infants, and the way they talk about it now is that baptism is about belonging, not about salvation. In the same way that circumcision was about belonging not salvation. Not every Jew who is circumcised on the 8th day and obeyed the Abrahamic covenant or the Mosaic or whatever, I don't remember. The Mosaic covenant. Not every one of them was saved and right in the eyes of the Lord. That was just a sign of like, well, we're a part of you guys now.
Yep. And that's I guess how now again, the other side of this is when I sat with it along, if my kids were taking it disrespectfully, and they were taking it in a way that was distracting, or they were mocking it, or they weren't understanding and they were doing it in a way that I felt like was destructive, then I felt like I felt the Spirit just be like, that would be the point where you step in and you have to teach and coach and talk. But right now, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my mindset with almost any of these controversial things. Like, are you actually taking the time to get to the place where you can hear the Spirit and hear what Jesus would tell you about the thing? To the place that you really recognize the conflict. You really recognize what's going on. Is I felt more scared about how people were going to judge my kids than I felt about whether or not my kids were doing something wrong.
Yeah. Which is tribalistic.
It's tribalistic, exactly.
Yeah. And it's saying that my peers are the judge, God is not the judge.
Mm-hmm.
And if my peers think it's bad, I should avoid disbelonging, being removed from this group, no matter what God thinks about it.
Yep. And I think going back to this particular situation and thinking through it, I did a very similar thing. Mark could have approached this a different way. And I would have probably, I think I would have been more accepting of, but what he said or what he spoke up about, I didn't completely disagree with him on either. And so it's this weird thing. And so this is what it led to me, is that I really feel like tone is the thing that I look for in controversy.
Yeah, to bring it back around, this is not a podcast about baptism or about whatever.
No.
It's a podcast about how do you sift through chaotic, massive information.
Yep.
And how do you choose who to listen to and who to follow?
So Jesus, when he walked Israel for 3 years, had this beautiful ability to take incredibly confrontational, conflicting, difficult, complex things and sift them down to simple answers with a calm and gentle, most of the time, especially with people that weren't in the religious side of things, tone. It was just so soft and gentle. I was talking to you previously about the woman at the well is one of my favorite examples of this, or Peter when he walks on the waves. We read tone into how Jesus talks to these people based on what we feel like, either what we've experienced or what we've been told. And it's not necessarily that that's always a bad thing. You have to lean in. I think what it tells me, though, is how you picture Jesus.
Here's the tone you read the text, and it's not inspired.
Here's what I know about Mark Driscoll. Mark Driscoll reads the text as if you should be terrified of God because he is so big and he has the power to destroy you. And the way he teaches his theology has that at the center of it. And so I know that.
He also reads the text. And I want to apply this to this right now so it's super clear what we're saying.
Yeah.
He also reads the text with a lot of magical implications.
Yes. So he takes things that go wrong in the world as spirits and of the spiritual realm. And not that we're not denying in any way that there is a war that's unseen that the Bible describes. It's that over-spiritualizing everything and connecting it in mysterious ways sometimes is a very dangerous and poor way of interpreting the world.
It's not that he has a spiritual interpretation of the world. It's that he has a clear, named spiritual interpretation of the world. So one point of evidence toward this is he said, hey, there's this thing at this conference I didn't like, and it made me uncomfortable, and I prayed about it. And it was the spirit of Jezebel and the Asherah pole and all the stuff that's not literally true.
Yep.
And you could only have clarity about if, some sort of prophetic
vision.
Vision. God never mentioned that. He was just like, listen to me. I have clarity on the chaos in this issue.
And that's dangerous. It's really dangerous. And so what I want to bring it back to is so if you read a story like the woman at the well, why this theology can be scary is it changes the tone of Jesus's voice in the story. And so I want to show that. So it's not necessarily that somebody that has this belief that we're just talking about and these systems of understanding God are sometimes they don't feel that dangerous or that different than what we believe. And I'm not trying, again, Jesus, I need grace in my theology. I give you permission to learn. You give me permission to learn. This is just my understanding. I'm taking you through my brain. Remember, And so you read the woman at the well. Jesus shows up. He asks for water. She goes, well, you can't get water. You don't have anything to bring it up. Well, if you knew what I had, you would take it. I have living water. And she's like, well, surely give me this water because I'm here at noon in the center of the day. It's like, I don't want to do it. And he's like, well, call your husband. And she's like, I don't have a husband. And he's like, you're right. You don't have a husband. And the man, you've had 4 husbands, and the man you're living with right now is not. And if you read that with a fearful idea of God, it's going to sound something like this. Of course you don't have a husband, and the man you're living with right now isn't even your husband. Because it's a forceful, judgmental, fear-driven understanding of you need to listen to me. But if you read Jesus as someone as a display of God's love, John 3:16, or a display of God's compassion on the world, or as mercy, not sacrifice, then you read it like this. I know you. I know. You've been with 4 men, and this 5th one's not your husband. I know. And it's a calm and gentle reprieve of like the pain that this woman has been through. And why that's so important is because we mow over people in the pursuit of what we believe to be right. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, but any law that demands the sacrifice of love ceases to be the law that God intended.
You were just talking about this, reading John Mark Comer's book and talking about, so a short summary, sin in the Bible is, the Greek word for sin or whatever, however you want to talk about it, it's defined as missing the mark. So think about a bow and arrow archer person shooting at a target. There's a center, the bullseye, and that's where you want to hit. That's the best place to hit.
Yes.
And there are all these rings outside of it that are showing you how far from the center you are.
Yeah.
Again, like our centered set thing we talked about on Sunday.
Which is so good. Which book was that from, by the way?
It's just from the Voxology podcast with Mike Erie and Tim.
Mike Erie. That's what I wanted.
Something. Yes.
Mike Erie. That was the name. Okay.
Anyway, so sin is missing the mark. Sin is, a lot of times us in the Western English world want to think about sin as there are 613 laws and I've broken one of them. I have triggered, it almost it feels like to me like Mission Impossible. Got to go through this hallway with all these lasers. And all I have to do is avoid 613 lasers. Meanwhile, sin is actually defined as missing the mark, straying from the center. And so you made this point to me earlier this week. Do you remember? Yeah, make it.
I love the concept that John Mark Comer brings up and practicing the way that he brings this all up. And it was like he walked through my childhood. Where he's like, you know what missing the mark is? Sex before marriage. You know what missing the mark is? Having a beer. You know what missing the mark is? Your first cigarette. Like, you're
going with girls who do.
Yeah, it's like, and he walked through like my youth childhood in the church. And he goes, what if missing the mark isn't about the bad things? It's about what is the mark?
Yeah.
And he's like, what's the mark? And he postulates, and I think very truthfully in a good tone, which is always helpful, he says, what if love is the mark? And the acts of sin that you're committing or the things that you're doing that are immoral or selfish are just causing you to break love. They're causing you to break what God intended the world to look like. And reorienting yourself, recentering yourself is not about not doing all those things. It's about driving yourself to the love at the center of everything, because those things start to become things you can't do if that's your goal. It's your aim. And it feels much better to tell somebody, don't have sex with your wife or your girlfriend before she's your wife, because it's the best way to love her. She will trust your love in a way, and you'll protect her heart, and it's the best way to love her than to say God will be angry at you.
Sex before marriage is wrong, but why is it wrong?
Yes.
Well, it's wrong because it is straying from the center. It's straying from the ideal.
It fractures something in you and in the other person in a way that God loves you too much to let you do it, and he wants you to love people around him well enough. And it's the center. It's the same thing with anything that's in your life that you know is sinful. Ask the question, why is this breaking love? Not why am I doing it? Try to get to the place of what it would look like to love better.
What mark is this missing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think when I hear stories like how Jesus confronts this woman, or when Peter goes out on the water, which we just did in Matthew, and you hear, well, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And that's how you read it. Because in your mind, it's like the mom that's disappointed that you like played video games too long or spilt the milk or whatever, and why did you do that? You know the better way. And the reason you read it like that is because that's the way that you feel like you were either told or you would respond, or you feel like you're talking in a way that Jesus never would.
That's
to yourself.
The familiar tone you remember from an authority over you.
Yes. And so what ends up happening is you don't give love a chance to speak with the tone that it was intended, rather than hearing, hey, buddy, you little faith, why did you doubt? I'm right here. It's okay.
And we're not saying that Jesus never uses a tone like that. People love to bring up, I want to be like Christ. That's why I'm going to go flip tables. He did that once.
He did it once.
And to our point, he even did it in love. Hey, you're setting up a coffee shop in the only place that the outsiders can gather to worship me. Why have you distorted from the mark that this is a house of prayer? That is the center. And you've gone
way over there. And he's doing it with the people that are also claiming to be doing his work. And that's always the thing that he gets most frustrated about and he has the harshest tone for, are the people that speak up in using godly language in godly terms and say things in the wrong tone, in the wrong way. And he's frustrated at that. He gets mad at that. So I think at the end of this, as you're thinking through maybe how Jesus talks and interacts in his ministry, and yes, he does get frustrated at the Pharisees and he calls them snakes and brood of vipers and all this stuff. And yes, he does get even angry at Peter at one point and calls him Satan and tells him to get behind him. There are moments when Jesus's tone is very harsh, and I think those moments are worth leaning into. To why? Because I don't think it fractures what we're talking about. I think it reinforces, like you're saying. Flipping tables is to get the Gentiles to have space in the temple. His work isn't just for the Jews, it's for everybody, and they're breaking that love. The love is being limited by their choices, and he's frustrated by that.
They're upholding an institution that breaks love. Whereas a lot of the other people are just suffering from a health thing or a demon possession thing or whatever, which isn't necessarily their fault. But other people are suffering from an addiction to the brokenness outside of love.
And I think that's even when he yells at Peter, it's because Peter's trying to keep him from the cross, and the cross is the most important thing because it's going to save the world, and he's leaning into that. When he's angry at the brood of vipers, it's because they are missing him as the Messiah, and he's so frustrated that they're trying to basically limit the work of God, and anytime the God's limited is frustrating to him.
I don't know the original word for vipers and how close that would have been to the snake in the garden in 3 from the Septuagint, the Greek retranslation and whatever. I don't know any of that. But also, he could be saying in some veiled way, you snaky people, you are quoting Satan,
you
saying,
deceivers.
Did God really say whatever? Because the time we're going to talk about in this upcoming week's sermon is which we haven't gone to the preaching planning meeting, so hopefully this is what we actually do. But the story we're going to cover is like, hey, you disrespect your father and mother by using a loophole, saying that all your money is being given to the temple, being given to God, and also you get paid from the temple, and so you've made a loophole.
You're laundering your money through the temple, so you don't have to claim it.
So they don't have to be taken care of by you, and you have to be out money. Meanwhile, you tithe the mint you grow in your windowsill. You snaky people. Did God really say?
And I think that's why when we're trying to sift through voices and trying to figure out who we should listen to, because that's ultimately what this is I want us to learn where to lean in. Where to lean in and where to lean out. And sometimes that can be tricky because of how much information you possibly have at your disposal. Here's what I've found to be really helpful. If you find yourself having struggles to hear that calm, healthy, loving tone of Jesus, don't listen to preachers that don't have that tone. Don't listen to teachers that don't have that tone. It will merely reinforce what you thought was true rather than teach you something that could be new.
And by tone, what we're talking about is like attitude.
Attitude.
Not just like, are they soft-spoken but wrong? But like, do they have a Christ-like attitude that is gentle towards outsiders and sinners?
And do they speak about repentance and their own repentance? Do they speak about surrender and their own surrender? Do they talk about things in a way that you hear them following Jesus and admitting they struggle? I think those are the things. And then ultimately, I think when you're listening to things, I want you to lay it against how Jesus would respond to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't chase people. He didn't chase people down. If they didn't want to believe or belong, he just said, it's okay. Like, you can move on.
Yeah. He was sad.
He was sad and
rich young ruler.
disappointed, but he didn't necessarily chase after people ever. And so he made himself available and consistent and inviting, but he didn't chase. And I think there's a certain level of condemnation sometimes where I feel like if you're listening to some teachers, they're chasing people that are sinning and condemning them rather than inviting the people that are curious and want to learn and grow.
I think another area, which sort of ties into this, is like character. Mm-hmm. What character do they seem to have? How does that character match up with the center? Yep. How does it, and you could just say love in general, but you could also say the fruit of the Spirit, of which love is one. Yep. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, forbearance,
and self-control.
Self-control. Mm-hmm. I hopefully got all those right. Mm-hmm. And if not, I'm going to be struck dead in 3 seconds. But yeah, like how close is all preaching is preaching from your own mind, from your own discipleship, your own formation into something.
Yep. Well, and
they look like they're being formed into
yes.
Jesus.
That's my greatest struggle is that my kids are growing up hearing me preach, and my wife is growing up hearing me preach. And I know this because I've experienced it, aka like a Robbie or some other people that, Bill Hybels, people that we've seen fallen. If their life suddenly doesn't reflect what they're teaching, or who they are doesn't suddenly reflect, it is so incredibly difficult to get past that and to continue to learn from them. And they see the worst parts of me as well as my preaching. And so there's a certain part of me that I don't want to fracture that trust. I don't want to fracture that thing. And that doesn't mean that I have to live a perfect life. It just needs to be, I need to be aware of it and that I'm not above that.
Yeah.
And that some things can break that if I'm not careful.
The things that are the most important are humility, acknowledging your own weaknesses and working on your own weaknesses, prayer, all those sorts of things. Because this bleeds into conversations about which leaders do we follow today. I've also heard conversations in the past couple of years of like, can we read and benefit from Martin Luther King Jr. because he seemed to have extramarital affairs? Can we believe and read maybe some of the Wesleys, Methodism, or some other people because they were slave owners or because they were raised? Can we believe one of the best Greek word, which is the language the New Testament is written in, is Greek, Koine Greek. One of the best Greek word dictionaries for English is Kittle's Theological Dictionary of or something like that.
It's anyway, Kittle.
He has a big history of being anti-Semitic against Jews. Yeah. And also, I think maybe he had some weird sex stuff in his past. Like, does that mean that his dictionary is wrong or unfollowable? So for a lot of these, like, there are people from whom you can mine information.
Yep.
But if you notice or have researched and found character issues, keep that in mind rather than saying, but my tribe likes him.
Yep.
No, keep that in mind while you're going through it. So Bill Hybels with his leadership stuff.
Yep.
He had a large moral failure in his church and was kicked out.
Yep.
Does that make his leadership stuff wrong? Not necessarily, but if you look through his leadership stuff and there are holes with which his sin could have fit.
Yep.
Don't take that.
Yep.
Don't bring that with you. And a lot of leaders are character forming.
Yep.
So is their character Christ-like? Is their character worth following?
It will imprint on you.
Yeah.
They will imprint on you. And that's kind of what I guess you're driving at and I'm driving at is like, be careful what you allow to imprint on you because you will look like it and you will sound like it and you will talk like it. And I think that's my whole thought process around this is like, are we driving to just point out where everybody's missed the mark? Are we driving to the center to hit the mark? Mm-hmm. And who are we listening to that's helping us actually go and hit the mark of loving more like Jesus and God and offering forgiveness and kindness and all the things you mentioned? Are we driving to that to create the kingdom of heaven now, or are we just pointing out everyone else's faults?
Yeah. And I've heard this with like skiers and snowboarders. If you're snowboarding, skiing down a mountain and you look at the trees to avoid them, you will hit the trees.
Yep. If
your eyes are looking at the mark. If you look at the spot between the trees, you will miss the trees and you will hit the spot.
Yep.
So don't be aiming at the boundaries,
and that
be aiming at the center.
Yes, and that's my whole point. I think to close this out is when these things pop up that are controversial or tribal or irritating or frustrating or confusing. I think driving myself back to the idea, is this something that I need to be aware of so that I can bring unity and understanding to the people around me, but not necessarily let it be something that imprints into my life? Is this something that I need to learn and grow through because it's actually bringing something up in me that feels icky and I don't know why? And maybe you need to process that with somebody you trust and talk through and go, I don't understand why, but this makes me feel so gross. The worst part about the whole thing that happened this last weekend was not what Mark said. It's not what John did. It's not what James River did. It was how everyone in the crowd was so angry and divided the whole time.
It was this big mob
men.
mentality. So the thing happened, and John was like, "Hey, you're done," and Mark was like, "I received that." That was an interaction between two people, but 7,000 people were watching, and were like, "Ooh!" Like
and
this big, scary guerrilla mob.
It felt so biblical of just like how people respond, even under the banner of a church.
Yeah,
you know,
it felt like. It made me understand, and honestly, most large crowds make me understand how a crowd could have been welcoming Jesus on Palm Sunday. And it could be that it's not necessarily, but it could be that the same crowd or many of the same people were there shouting, crucify him on Thursday or Friday or whatever.
And I think that was the sadness. If I'm being honest, that was the sadness I leaned into. I was like, why does this make me so sad? Why does this make me feel so gross? And it's because the immediate response of the crowd was anger and frustration.
And tribalism. It's like, bring Mark back.
Yeah, bring Mark back or kick him out. Like, it was both it was just, and what was unifying 10 seconds before was fractured by two human beings. They ripped apart the kingdom of God rather than...
Which they may have been doing,
and I guess
healthy stuff.
That's where I'm like, it's hard. I know there's divisive things that can be said. I'm not trying to, but I think I leaned into that in the sense of like, why did this make me feel that way? And I wanted to understand why. And it's because Jesus said the number one thing he would love his church to try to fight for is unity. He stay unified, stay together, and look how broken and divided the church is. Yeah. And it still breaks my heart.
If you want to see a good Bible example of this, and I don't want to take a lot more time and do this.
Yeah.
But if you want to see a good Bible example of the sort of thing that happened this weekend, the leadership dispute, the tribalism, whatever, read the beginning, first 4 chapters of 1 Corinthians, and you will watch Paul, the spiritual head of this church. He is the one who planted it. He is the most mature one here. You will watch him say, I'm glad I didn't baptize any of you because the faith that you're in doesn't look like the faith. And it's because some of you say, I follow Apollos. Some say I follow Paul. Some say I follow Cephas, who is Peter. Some say I follow Christ. And he's like,
no,
you are not a church because of how you're doing these things. And one thing I want to say is that the temptation to follow some of these leaders like Mark or like John in these moments of division, to pick a side and be like, this side is right and I'm going to fight for it at all costs. I don't remember what I was going to say.
That doesn't look like Jesus.
No.
That's not what Jesus would do. It's just not. He never stands on either side of those things. Here's what I was going to say.
Yeah. A lot of times the reason we pick those things are charisma, effectiveness, power, skill. We like the way they do their thing.
We like the Riz, man.
Yeah,
we like the Riz.
That's why people use the same concept to trash Hillsong for a long time and be like, they're just popular. That's the only reason. But I actually liked Hillsong a lot compared to the other major churches who put out worship music. Because the other ones, you'd watch their song explainer videos and it'd be like, well, my friend gave me this prophetic picture for my birthday. And I'm like, what the frick is that?
Yeah.
But Hillsong would always be like, well, we were reading at the end of Matthew 7 that this, deeply involved in scripture and meditation and prayer and Jesus things.
Yep.
And so they'd be like, that's why we wrote this song.
Yep.
And sometimes the song would be weird and you wouldn't want to do it at your church, and that's okay.
But
the foundation that they were standing on to write those songs was the center. It was Jesus. And that's why I will still hopefully see Brooke Ligertwood in concert this year. Not because concerts are important or worship music is a concert or whatever, but because when she does a concert, I've heard like Chris Tomlin does, but I haven't heard him in a concert, that it's like a worship service.
Yep.
That it has tickets sold to it, and you can feel however you want about
Shane,
that.
man, I feel the same way. Shane.
She'll come out there and then like stop mid thing and just be like, I can't get this scripture out of my head, and I just feel like God wants me to read it right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an expression of her power as a musician or her skill as a musician. That's ceasing her skill as a musician to just read God's word.
And again, these are why when you listen to people, they imprint on you and you model and you imitate their things. And that's why who you hang out with, show me your friends, show you your future. If you have a bunch of people that are doing things and revealing things that are going to imprint on you, be careful, you'll look like them. You really will. The thing I'll end this whole thing is whatever the new controversy that's going to be coming out next week, whatever happens, hopefully it's a little further away than Springfield, Missouri. But whatever happens, try to drive back to the center of what we're supposed to be focusing on. And don't get caught up in the outskirts or picking a side or a team. Try to drive back to what would Jesus demand? What would love demand? Andy Stanley has a great thing that he says about helping you understand what to do next. Mm-hmm. And it says, in light of my past experience and my current circumstances and my future hopes and dreams, what does love demand of me? And I love that idea of just like in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what does love demand of me? And I think that is ultimately when you bump up against this, that should be what we're thinking. And the cost sometimes can be going against tribe. The cost sometimes can be staying silent. The cost sometimes can be speaking up and saying the thing. And sometimes the cost can just be bearing the wounds of someone that's broken and just walking with them, because we all are making mistakes. And, we're all trying to heal, and I get that. So ultimately, I think that's the place that I want to leave you with, is just like, when you're walking through this stuff, be kind and gentle. Don't be too judgmental and frustrated. Speak in a tone that reflects Jesus's heart and the love that we're all supposed to be aiming at. That was the love that came and rescued each person.
And pick leaders that have Jesus' character more than Jesus' fame.
Yep. And trust that in the end, we're all going to stand before and give a judgment, in the sense of like, I think we all are going to have to deal with our brokenness, and trust that Jesus is the one that heals. We're all in progress of pursuit, not perfection, just pursuing. It's uncomfortable to grow, but there's a peace that comes in when we trust God and we hand it back to him. So, hey, thanks so much for listening. If you spent this time to do it, and I know for some of you may have some questions or you may disagree with some of the things we said, we'd love to have a further dialogue with you. You can send us an email or talk. And if you like this and feel like it could be helpful for someone else in your life, feel free to subscribe or share. Obviously, a review on any of the podcast things is great as well. Zach, Courtney, Mom, we appreciate you. All right?
Love you guys.
Have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See you.